So great. Thanks. We're now going to start the next briefing, which is the first one by the new president of the Economic and Social Council, Bob Ray, the permanent representative of Canada to the United Nations. And that briefing, at this point, I will turn over to the moderator, Paul Simon, who is the media and communications focal point for the ECOSOC Secretariat, and he'll be the one to call on you for any questions. But before we do that, I will now turn the floor over to Ambassador Ray. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. I thought I would just give you a bit of an overview of some of the priorities that we've established. Very honored to be here, obviously, in this new role as the president of ECOSOC. It's important for people to understand that when the charter was negotiated in 1945, the world was coming out of the chaos of World War II, and there was a need to focus on not only the needs of peace and security, but also the economic and social condition of the world. And so the Security Council was established with its own rules and procedures, and ECOSOC was established with its own rules and procedures. And I think the need for an organization within the UN that looks at the overall social and economic condition of the people of the world, which is increasingly complex and with so many institutional setups, all of the UN agencies. Important to recall that of the total amount of the UN budget, which is about $75 billion a year, roughly 7 or 8 billion of that is made up of peacekeeping and the Secretariat, and about another 67 billion is made up of what else the UN does. So ECOSOC has a big job and major responsibilities, obviously working in cooperation with the international financial institutions in Washington and around the world. But we want to look particularly at 3 major issues at the moment. The first one is this issue of displacement and the movement of people, where because of conflict and now increasingly because of climate change, more and more people are being forced to leave their homes, either for other places in their own countries or around the world. It's creating enormous challenges for the world, and something that we increasingly, I think, have to see as an issue for the Council. I've had very good feedback from a number of agencies looking forward to being able to talk with us about what they're doing and how they're engaging with us. We provide them with a platform to connect with New York in a very positive way, and I think it's going to be an important discussion. The second is looking at artificial intelligence, more from the perspective of the connection between AI and development, and looking in particular at, on the downside, the negative risks of greater inequality and a greater gap between rich and poor, and on the positive side, the way in which AI can contribute in terms of data collection and in terms of moving forward on getting better access to information so that information can be more widely shared as we attempt to improve our performance on the SDGs, because we clearly are behind and we still have a lot of work to do. My own view is that the SDGs don't end in 2030, that it's important to have targets, but it's also important to recognize that this is ongoing work of the organization, and we have to keep working on it in very practical ways. And finally, the third is financing for development, because I think this is going to be a year in which financing for development issues will become crucial and will remain crucial. So it's important for us to work with all of the co-facilitators who are working on the build-up to the meetings in Spain in 2025, and for the social summit, which will take place in the next term, but also for us to be looking at how to improve the dialogue, the working dialogue between the UN, between ECOSOC, the members of the General Assembly, and the international financial institutions. I think from quite a lot of time we've seen megaphone diplomacy on both sides. We see our role as trying to make sure that there's a stronger working relationship between the two, and all of us are able to work together and understand what's being done. Gender equality, inclusion, and the SDGs overall will be cross-cutting things that we'll be looking at and constantly referring to. We're looking forward to a very active year. I think the Council has had wonderful success under my predecessors, both Lachazara, as well as with Paula, the predecessors from Bulgaria and Chile. And we're looking forward to building on that with a new bureau and really appreciating the opportunity to engage. So that's my opening comments. I want to thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you and happy to answer any questions. Paul.
Yes, I would like if you could introduce yourself before asking any questions, please.
Thank you. Abdelhamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Thank you for the briefing, sir. My question is about reforming ECOSOC. Has been any effort? The way they're talking about reforming the Security Council and the UN system, and Bretton Woods system needs reform. How do you see reforming the ECOSOC to meet the current challenges of the world? And the second, what role you going to play in the summit of the future in September? Is there any role for ECOSOC there? Thank you.
To take your second question first, if I may, because I think it's immediately in front of us. When you look at the draft doc, we don't have the final agreed statement yet, but when you look at the draft, most of it turns on ECOSOC. When you look at what are our responsibilities on financing for development, what are our responsibilities on climate change, you go down the list of things you look at in the document, you'll see these are all things that ECOSOC needs to be engaged with. I don't think it's so much a question of reforming the structure of ECOSOC. It's a charter body. Its structures are set up in the charter. I have a long history of constitutional negotiation in my own country, and sometimes you have to go around the documents to get at the change you want. I think we need to be more nimble and more able to respond to critical issues. And I think we need to use the Bureau and the presidency to try to draw attention to critical issues. Nobody told me that we should be drawing attention to issues of displacement, but I thought it was a good idea. So as president, I said, yes, we'll take this on, and we'll try to create the places where this can happen. We will be very actively involved in the discussions and debates in the Summit of the Future. Our Prime Minister will be here for that, but Canada, through the presidency and through ECOSOC, will also be involved in those issues. So we intend to be very, very actively engaged. I think there are some practical things we can do. What I've described, for example, about the relationship between New York and Washington, between the UN system and the international financial institutions. I think ECOSOC can be a bridge. And I think we have to see ourselves as trying to be as much of a bridge as possible so we can create a dialogue and create a discussion. When you talk to debtor countries, which are most countries are in debt. When you look at debtor countries, they have a strong feeling that there are structures and hierarchies in place in Washington which sometimes make their situation more difficult. Here, I think we are the house of the people in New York. Here we can, I think, give people an opportunity to discuss and think through how they can present their cases and how we can lead to some constructive reforms. Quite honestly, I've already been involved in reforms because as co-chair of the Financing for Development Working Group, which was set up many years ago, Canada and Jamaica co-chaired an entire process that went on for 2 years to try to produce more change and more dialogue. And I think it contributed to some of the changes that we've seen so far. But we intend to try to be that bridge.
Yes.
Thank you, Ambassador. Stephanie Fillion from Asahi Shimbun. I wanted to follow up on the Pact of the Future. So you mentioned climate. Is there anything you can name that is new and actionable that is in the Pact of the Future as of now, in your opinion? And also maybe more broadly, there is a lot of skepticism about the Summit of the Future at the UN and kind of what can be implemented, and especially in the dire situation the world is in. So why do you think the Summit of the Future is important?
Well, I mean, first of all, ever since 1945, there's been skepticism about the UN. It's not a new thing. The UN structure is one which, with the vetoes and with all the other ways in which we have of working, it's difficult to create breakthroughs. It's challenging to do that. But I think we have to be clear that the UN itself is the only place at the moment, the only global institution we have, where countries facing very, very different situations and with very different points of view are getting together, are forced to come together. I think it's premature for me to comment on the Pact of the Future because we don't have a final document yet. But I also think that we need to look at the steady progress that we have made. If you take climate change, for example, yes, we are still in the middle of a very real crisis, but we also have treaties. We also have countries and businesses and whole methods of production that are changing as a result of climate change. And they will continue to change because of the extent to which we express global anxiety and global pressure. But we always have to be looking at the practical steps that we can take to actually go one step further, two steps further to get to where we need to get to. At no other time in the history of the world has there been a political effort to change the way our economies and systems of production work. The Industrial Revolution was not the result of a world conference. The digital revolution was not the result of a world conference. What we're doing on climate change and trying to reduce emissions is happening in good measure because of the extent to which global pressure is building and is being expressed through the treaties and agreements that we reached. That's true for biodiversity as well. So I am not in the pessimist camp. I never will be, because I think it's the worst operating principle you can have for your own life. And I think it's terrible for an organization to think through the same way. So I'm always looking for the little glimmers of light that we can achieve. And I'm sure when the Pact for the Future comes out, I'll be able to tell you what I think they are.
Next question.
Yes. Do you think that the financial institutions are easier to reform than the United Nations? Is it more realistic? Is it realistic to think that the financial institutions could be reformed without having before the reform inside the UN?
Well, I mean, I think one has to be aware of the fact that formal reform, what I would call constitutional reform, is the most difficult kind of change you can make in any country. And international constitutional reform is even more difficult because of the structures we've created, because of the vetoes. In effect, there's a veto in Washington for both the World Bank and the IMF in terms of the share structure and so on. And we have formal vetoes in the Charter because of what was agreed in 1945. So faced with that, we can either throw up our hands and say there's nothing to be done, or we can say, what can we do? And I think, frankly, there already have been changes. I mean, we have $650 billion worth of SDRs that suddenly became available in good measure because of the pressure from a number of institutions that came together and said, in countries that said, let's do this, let's make a difference, let's add to the body of finance that's available to institutions, some of which, by the way, will be drawn on as a result of Hurricane Beryl. There's money now available to many Caribbean countries which was not there before. So when you look at it in practical terms, you can say we've been making progress. When you look at it, compare it to all that remains to be done, there's a huge amount to do. There's a huge amount to do. I do think that as a result of COVID and the global crisis that resulted from that, there has been a greater sense in all the institutions that they have to do a better job of working together. But there's still a lot to do, and there's still a ways to go. And so I think that's where ECOSOC can play a constructive role in helping to make that happen. As long as we maintain this ruthless attachment to pragmatism, which we desperately need at the moment, we will never find the perfect offerings that people are looking for. We will only find improvements. And that's what we have to be trying to get to.
I think we have one question with one representative from online, Augusta Sareva from Bloomberg. Augusta?
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for the briefing, Ambassador Ray. This is Augusta Sareva with Bloomberg. So you talked about improving the relationship between the UN and international financial institutions and how ECOSOC can act as a bridge. So how do you hope to do that going forward?
Well, some of it's quiet diplomacy, which I've already been doing, but having now announced that I'm doing it, it's not so quiet anymore. But we're doing it. We have, over the years, really been trying to work with the World Bank and with the IMF. I've found the leadership of both institutions to be very receptive to meeting and engaging with us. And when we were doing the FFD process, we had really good discussions. We have good discussions here at the UN. We have, I think, a much greater willingness on the part of both institutions at the senior level to engage and continue to engage. I myself am a firm believer in it. I think I spoke yesterday in my comments about, some people, the beginning of our discussions, many people said, stick to your lane. And in fact, in my own country, I have some people who still say that. But as I pointed out, look, the lane is created by the Charter. The Charter sets out in Chapter 9 and in all the sections under Chapter 9, it sets out very clearly what the work of ECOSOC is supposed to be. It includes all of the issues. It includes all of the issues affecting the condition of the world's peoples. And therefore, we have some responsibilities. We can't just walk away from them. And I know that there's a willingness to engage on the other side, and I think that's very important to stress.
Next question.
Hi, Ambassador. Thank you. This is Jen Peltz from the Associated Press. I wanted to bring up the topic of AI as you did. As you know, the UN has been engaged in a number of endeavors on this front in the last year, the GA resolution and the work of the high-level advisory body. What's next, and what's ECOSOC's role?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to stress that there's a lot of good conversation going on right now. Here at the UN, in the OECD, in UNESCO, in Geneva at the ITU. Globally, there's a huge range of people who are getting involved, which I think is inevitable. The subject is complex, the interest, the stakeholders, the pace at which the technology is changing is so fast that it's not something you can just readily kind of, pull it together and say, now we're going to regulate this. That's not that simple. My suspicion is, my hope is, frankly, that the Global Compact will come up with something of a roadmap. I think all the institutions that are working away at this will also have their own views and how it should go forward. I don't think there will necessarily be a kind of global treaty. I think that's too ambitious at the moment. I think what there will be is a willingness to listen to the experts and to insist on the importance of separating out the rhetoric, the rumor, the fear, the exaggeration from the reality. And that's where we want the scientists and the experts to tell us what's going on. And I think it's important for us to understand that there is no one body of authority that's going to dictate the way forward. It's going to come from a plurality of voices, and it's important to keep that plurality going and to recognize that it's going to be conversation. In all of this, where does ECOSOC play a role? I think because we represent member states from all parts of the world, some very high tech, some very low tech, some with huge amounts of expertise, others with less so. Again, we have to play the role of trying to make sure that AI is accessible to everyone, that it is understandable to everyone, that its method of governance is transparent to everyone, and that it doesn't become a source of even greater inequality. We've already seen, because of the financialization of the economy, we've seen a huge increase in inequality over the last 20 years. And we've also seen through the digital revolution that some countries are much, much better prepared to take advantage of technology, the internet, and the access to those things. Others are further behind. But we're making some good progress. I mean, talk about the World Bank, they've just announced a $300 billion program for the electrification of much of Africa, 300 million people coming forward able to take advantage of it. It's a huge deal. It's a major, major construct that will make a big difference in access to technology. If you don't have reliable electricity, it's difficult to have reliable contact to the internet and to AI. So these things all go together.
Next question.
Thank you, Abdul Hamid, again. I have two questions. One on Gaza.
Yes?
Do you see any role ECOSOC can play in rebuilding the economy in Gaza following a ceasefire and an end to attacks on Gaza? If ECOSOC can play any role there in rebuilding the economy. And my second question as PR of Canada, sir, there is fire now raging in Jasper, a beautiful city I visited several times. Was there any human error there, or what lessons can Canada draw from this fire to the world? Thank you.
Well, the first lesson to be drawn, thank you very much for the question. On Jasper, all Canadians are profoundly concerned about what's happened. We hope very much that the losses can be contained, but they're very serious. We've had a number of devastating forest fires, unfortunately, in Western Canada and in Eastern Canada over the last several years, worse than before, bigger than before. So one obvious conclusion is climate change is real. The planet is heating, and the heating and drying of the planet makes fires more prevalent. I know that all governments will be looking at this question is, are we building, in Canada and all around the world, are we building the resilience necessary and the measures that we can take to prevent fires? And that's a question I think obviously every country will be looking at. One of the one encouraging thing one can see, and I think is true, is our ability to evacuate and our ability to save lives and to make sure that people are able to get out, whether it's Fort McMurray, which was a major disaster for us several years ago in northeastern Alberta, whether it's this particular the situation in Jasper in the western part of Alberta, in British Columbia, in the interior, we've had significant ones. We had them in Quebec as well. There are many Indigenous communities that are affected. We've been able to evacuate people in some of the most difficult circumstances. So the loss of life has been dramatically reduced. But these are natural events that have intensified as a result of climate change, which should make us double our efforts to deal with climate change, both in terms of mitigation and in terms of how we adapt to it. And this question of adaptation, I think, is a question for all countries. It's not just a question for wealthy ones or poor ones. It's a question for all countries. On Gaza, I think obviously the situation has to become one of peace rather than one of war. My Prime Minister and the Prime Ministers of Australia and New Zealand issued a statement today on the need for a ceasefire and on the need for a strategy to get us to the next stage of rebuilding and dealing with what needs to happen. I think the fact of the matter is ECOSOC has overall responsibilities. For example, UNRWA makes an annual report to us. We work with UNRWA. We work with UNHCR. We work with all of the agencies, UNICEF and all of the other UN agencies that are working in Gaza, that were working in Gaza and that will return to Gaza. Many of them are working now actively in Gaza, despite the conflict, and we'll continue to work with them. And I mentioned the issue of displacement. This is a classic example where, because of conflict, the lives of people have been dramatically affected. Gaza is probably the most dramatic example, where close to 40,000 people have been killed. And that is what makes it essential for us to end the violent conflict and to make a point of creating stable structures that will allow us to rebuild. And I'm sure that in some way ECOSOC will be involved in those discussions, but clearly it's the agencies on the ground that have the primary responsibility.
Next question.
Thanks, Ambassador. It's Margaret Bashir with Voice of America. Perhaps in your national capacity, I just wanted to ask you for an update on Haiti on the MSS, since Canada is so involved in the mission. Can you give us any updates on further deployments of police contributors or new pledges of equipment? We know the Americans just pledged some armored vehicles when Ambassador Thomas Greenfield was in Port-au-Prince earlier this week, but if there's other contributions and money for the trust fund particularly.
Well, I mean, without getting into detail, I mean, I wear two hats here because I do lead the advisory group to ECOSOC on Haiti, which is how I originally got involved in ECOSOC. So I remain very much involved in the discussions around Haiti. We had an excellent meeting 2 weeks ago with the Prime Minister of Haiti and his team. They came to New York. We had a really, really good discussion with them about what they need, what we want to do. I had a good discussion yesterday with the leaders of the Caribbean elders, who were such an instrumental part of changing the dynamic of that was holding us back politically in terms of getting a deeper consensus within the Haitian government. Canada has made very, very substantial commitments on equipment as well as on financing the trust fund. We are continuing to work with the U.S. and many other countries with respect to the trust fund. We're working with the Kenyans on how we can dialogue effectively with other contributing parties. Canada has been directly involved in the training of the Caribbean contingent that will be going to Haiti, and we do need more money, and we do need more people, and we do need more equipment. The critical challenges are this. First, we have to get the violence under control, and I think it's fair to say that the Haitian National Police, together with the MSS, have been able to make some progress in providing greater security. But the problem is by no means solved. The gangs are still essentially running most of Port-au-Prince, and we have to deal with that issue. And I know that the Prime Minister is very much determined to do that. I think as well, in addition to this immediate security issue, we need to strengthen the justice system. And we are looking at ways which we can invest in doing that, encouraging other countries to do it. And finally, we need to look at the longer-term development of Haiti. We have an immediate security and humanitarian crisis. There's still 500,000 people displaced out of their homes in Port-au-Prince because of the gang warfare, because the gangs have taken over. So nobody should think it's an easy problem, but you will find, I think, now more and more people and agencies are returning to Haiti. There's a greater sense that it's possible for them to work there and to carry out their activities there in that way. So that situation is improving. But it's also true to say that there's far, far more to do. And the biggest mistake we could make, in my opinion, is with respect to this problem and many others, is taking our eye off the ball. It's still a very, very tough situation, and we need to understand that hurricane season is still in play. There's a lot of areas of uncertainty that we need to be aware of and understand how these things can have an impact. But I'm very impressed by the attitude and also the capacity of the transitional government and their determination to really push harder on things that need to be worked through more effectively. So that's been very positive.
Could I just ask you one quick follow-up? Where is Canada training those police from the Caribbean countries?
We've worked with the Jamaicans in making sure we have facilities in Jamaica that will allow us to do that, and we're continuing to work with many other countries to work out how we can push even further and harder in building up the capacity. I think it's important to take a step back and recognize the whole approach that we're taking is as much as possible to strengthen the Haitian National Police, to strengthen Haitian institutions. Instead of saying, let's go in and solve the problem and then leave again, that doesn't work. We've tried that several times in the last 30 years. And my Prime Minister has been very clear, we're not going to do that again. What we are going to do is make sure that the capacity of the Haitian people, the Haitian institutions, Haitian governments, elected officials, and Haitian National Police have the ability to respond. And that, I think, is the critical point.
Next question.
Yeah, just one quick clarification. You mentioned that Prime Minister Trudeau intended to attend the Summit of the Future. Can you just confirm if he also intends to stay and deliver Canada's speech?
No. I mean, I probably shouldn't even have said that he's coming. I know that he's planning to come. Hoping to come would perhaps be a better way to say it. It's part of, I mean, it is, he usually comes into New York in the fall, and I hope that he will, but I can't confirm anything else.
Any additional questions?
Pas de questions en français? Peut-être je devrais dire quelques paroles en français?
Oui.
Ça va?
Oui.
Vous êtes
Pas de
d'accord?
problème. Il n'y a pas de problème.
Je suis naturellement très honoré par notre présidence du Canada pour l'ECOSOC. Nous voyons que l'ECOSOC peut jouer un rôle important dans la vie de l'ONU. C'est établi par la charte. C'est un aspect important du travail, de l'horaire, si vous voulez, de l'ONU pendant toute l'année. Nous avons la possibilité, je pense, de répondre plus effectivement, surtout à 3 questions. D'abord, le déplacement des populations dans le monde, jusqu'à quel point ça représente une crise pour beaucoup de monde qui sont marginalisés par les événements du changement du climat, des événements de conflit. Alors, c'est un aspect important de notre travail. Deuxième point, sur la question de l'intelligence artificielle, nous devons assurer que ça ne devienne pas une force pour l'inégalité croissante dans le monde, mais au contraire que nous donnons les capacités à tout le monde d'avoir accès à de nouvelles technologies importantes pour le monde. Et surtout sur la question du financement du développement, ça reste toujours un défi important. Nous aurons une session à Séville, en Espagne, pendant l'été de 2025. Et avant ça, il faut faire beaucoup de travail pour assurer que nous avons une meilleure relation entre la Banque mondiale, l'Organisation des finances mondiales. Tout ça doit travailler de plus proche avec l'ONU. Et pour moi, c'est un aspect important du travail que l'ECOSOC peut faire. Et j'attends à pouvoir peut-être donner quelques idées et quelques pouces envers une direction positive pour non seulement pour l'ECOSOC, mais je pense pour résoudre ces problèmes qui sont tellement importants pour le monde. Je vous remercie beaucoup.
Thank you, everybody, for joining that press briefing, and we see you next time. And thank you for Ambassador Ray.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you.